First, I have to say that in Australia, we eat our oysters raw. This is actually my first time eating a cooked oyster, so just thought I'd add that. 刚才吃的那个是非常好吃。It's like an explosion of seafood in my mouth. But here's the funny thing, I heard that in addition to eating and farming oysters, the Shajing people actually use oyster shells to build houses. This I have got to see. This is the Jiang Ancestral Hall in Shajing. They use couplets at the entryway, which basically condense long histories of big families. This family here comes from Jiang City in Shandong Province. So while the Jiang Ancestral Hall is a typical Liangnan-style ancestral building, there is something very different about it. It has a wall entirely built with oyster shells. Chinese people can be very creative when it comes to building materials. In ancient times, due to geographic restrictions, Shajing here was unable to get some of the basic building materials. But thanks to local ingenuity, there was a fantastic solution. Locals took materials that were readily available in Shajing like oyster shells, mud, brown sugar and glutinous rice and built structures that have really stood the test of time. But I am curious to know, where did all of these oyster shells come from? In ancient times, salt mining and oyster farming were the main industries of Shajing. In order to protect the safety of the people working in these water-based industries, the imperial court introduced some special rules and regulations. Chinese have built towers to combat against monsters and natural disasters. This Longjin stone pagoda behind me was built 800 years ago, and it was built to prevent flooding. More than 100 years before the Longjing Stone Pagoda was built, a poem called Tasting Oysters was widely circulated. The oysters mentioned in the poem are the oysters widely known as Shajing oysters today. So I have to say, that is very impressive. Shajing people have literally been eating, using, and talking about oysters for 1,000 years or more. And that's crazy because that's longer than the history of my entire country. And I thought us Australians loved our oysters. Well, I think it's fair to say oysters are very important to this town. We're here in the Shajing Temple Museum and there are a lot of resources here to help people imagine what this place was like in the past. In the early days of the founding of the new China, Shajing oysters were one of China's only exports at the time. And believe it or not, it made a significant contribution to China's economic development. This certificate here, issued by the Chinese Premier in 1958, has become a huge source of pride for the Shajing people. Due to economic development needs, the people of Shajing have moved many oyster farms to Taishan, Yangjiang, Huidong and Shanwei. This has not only given the Shajing oyster industry more room for development and growth, but it's also improved the local aquaculture technology and increased people's income. In Chinese tradition, skills are passed down from generation to generation. Many people see practicing these ancient skills as a way of paying respect and honouring their ancestors. At the same time, these ancient skills are built upon and improved from new ideas from each generation.